Hey fellas, did you know that I like video games?
It's so funny. That's such a good joke. No, it's not. That wasn't funny. Please.
Die!
Gaming has been a part of my life ever since I was a little kid. I grew up with some of the best retro consoles like the PlayStation or the Sega Genesis. Then I got myself an N64. And just saying the word retro makes me feel like I'm already one foot in the grave. And ever since I got my hands on those controllers, I've been a lover of games ever sinch. I've been around the block for quite a few years, and frankly, I'm disgusted by the state of modern day gaming. Now, this is obviously an opinion piece kind of video.
Well, duh.
But as someone who's been a huge fan of gaming for most of my life and having seen a ton of dumb moves made on the part of the industry, I figured we'd take some time and dive into the biggest issues that I and, well, several people have with the industry. Although knowing some of the people who quoted my tweet with their answer, I'm sure gonna stoke the fires. Good. We need to have an honest conversation with each other if we want this industry to actually survive. Or let it crash and burn. I don't know about you, but I'm just a YouTuber. I doubt I'll have the power to change anyone's mind. Well, with that out of the way, I'm MangaKamen, and these are the numerous problems with modern gaming. I've been a major fan of Pokemon since its inception. Generation 5 has always been my favorite gen since it came out, and it's remained that way ever since. It's not to say that I don't have fun with the more recent games, but there's just this level of polish and, dare I say, soul put into the Gen 5 games that I just haven't been able to find in the current iterations. Not helped is the bork state of recent games.
Are you looking at this? Hello there.
I'm in my mum's car. Boom, boom.
I love Pokemon as a concept, and I can appreciate that game development is tough nowadays, but this is insane and shouldn't be acceptable for a full-price product. If I'm paying $60 to $70 for a game, I would like it to not be giving me nightmare fuel from technical issues. Mounts turned invisible, animations failed to work, and raids gave rewards even on a loss. To a lot of people, these games felt rushed, and when you have a game like Pokemon that at its core is straightforward gameplay loop and has simplicity coded into it, it doesn't help. Pokemon is the most popular IP in the world, and with that comes a ton of funding. This is a popular talking point used by a lot of critics who often argue that Pokemon should put more into the gaming aspect. And while I do agree generally, I don't appreciate how insufferable this argument has been used. Personal gripes with the internet behavior aside, it's shocking how a lot of games nowadays are released in some less than stellar states.
Oh no!
I'm sure that when I said that, there's probably a few popular examples that popped into your brain. Arkham Knights, Grand Theft Auto, the trilogy, Cyberpunk 2077, Assassin's Creed Unity is the thing of nightmares. Then there's that mess that was Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, or if you want an example that I'm more personally attached to, No More Heroes 3, where the game bugged out after the first boss, crashed my game on the Switch, and deleted my save data so I had to do the whole thing all over again. Gonna be honest, that kinda tanked my experience for the entire game, and I've tried to come back to it a few times, but I just kept losing my interest because of that experience. Now, part of the reason why I bring this up is because a good number of games are getting pushed out the door with these issues. Normally there's a day one patch that can fix them, but that's dependent on the game itself, and sometimes these issues don't really get fixed, or there are other issues that crop up because of these patches. This isn't to say that older games didn't have issues or bugs, they did, and rarely at times a patch would even be available, and even if it did, back in the day you probably even know it existed. Going back to Pokemon, in Generation 3 there was something called the berry glitch. There were a few ways to fix it, but most of them required buying another game, something that later creations of Ruby and Sapphire would fix. Once the World Wide Web became a lot more prominent, day one patches were becoming more and more common, and that's clearly a good thing, especially since it can mitigate the issues of bugs most of the time. The issue I take, and I would assume that a lot of gamers also take, is that these bugs shouldn't be in a finished product at the first place when it's sold on release. These buggy initial releases are becoming a lot more common, and this is because of the business side of things, where developers are being pushed to get the product out due to time constraints. It really feels like there's some fat cat execs and board members who don't understand that quality is going to earn more customer loyalty than they could lose by delaying another few months. But gotta push out more games and earn money for that Christmas season, am I right? Why wait to take some time when you can just fix fix the issues afterwards. It's a mindset that is understandable if it happened a few times, especially with a lot of the larger projects, but when it becomes a much more prominent event in a ton of games, that's when it becomes an issue. And what's even worse is when this is rewarded. I brought up Pokemon Scarlet and Violet at the beginning of the section. Well, despite all the bugs, they're the 4th most sold Pokemon games of all time. Now, I still enjoy Pokemon to this day, but even I have to put my foot down at this sort of thing. Is this the biggest issue in gaming? Well, that's up to you. I know that I'm paying $60 to $70 for a game. I like it to, you know, not have bugs like this on day one.
What?
And wait for a patch to come out just so I could play the damn game that I paid for. It's disgusting to see AAA studios essentially adopt the release it now, finish it later mindset. We've gotten to the point where we applaud games for actually being completed before release to the public. This should not be how games, especially games that have tons of support, should be. Although, since we brought that $70 price tag...
Gasoline is too damn high!
So, how about this economy?
It's a super...
I mean, this economy is a joke, and it feels like if you even want to have a modicum of fun nowadays, you gotta shout a lot more dough for less. We're now entering the darkest timeline where games are now starting to cost $70, and these greedy gaming companies essentially know that we as gamers will pay that much. Xbox and PlayStation have been doing that, and so has Nintendo with the release of Tears of the Kingdom. And you know, it's going to be worse down the line. Nintendo has stated that this price tag isn't going to be the standard going forward, but it'll be a case-by-case basis. Oh yeah, that's always a good sign now, ain't it? I wouldn't be against paying $70 if I got incentivized to do so. What do I mean by this? It's quite simple. Include stuff with the game that players can enjoy, especially with physical releases. If I'm paying $70 for a game, give me things like the soundtrack, a poster. Hell, games used to come with instruction manuals with them, with awesome artwork in them, but they're slowly dying off. Digital releases, I can understand you can't really do that. However, if you're still charging about $70 for a digital release, then your game better be the greatest in the world, or you better give me a ton of additional value. But here's the problem. A lot of this stuff will often be regulated as additional DLC you have to purchase. It's content that's already on the game. How hard is it to give me a digital code to get the soundtrack for your games? I guess you gotta squeeze as much blood as you can from a rock. I'm not trying to beat up Pokemon here, but let's consider they're a DLC pack. They're going to be getting the DLC editions for Scarlet and Violet soon, which cost about $35 for each version. Which, to me, considering how well the base product was made, is kind of an insult. But fine, let's move away from Pokemon and talk about Resident Evil 4, the remake. The game is actually pretty well done. It's got a lot of polish, and I'm still waiting on a review of the game to be fully edited, sorry. But when the game came out, Capcom decided to keep its trend of first day DLC going to offer you the deluxe version of the game, where you get a few extra outfits, a couple of weapons, some screen filters for some reason, the original game's soundtrack, and a map that leads you to treasures in the game that are otherwise unattainable. A lot of people will probably argue and say that this is extra content, so it's only natural that Capcom would charge for it. But this isn't extra content. This was all good to go and could have easily been included in the base game, but was cut so Capcom could squeeze a little more money out of your wallet. What's worse, if you actually are like me and want to get the base game, not wanting to support this DLC practice, well, screw you, Common, it's now $20 if you want to get that DLC. They want to pay $10 up front? Well, get bet, loser! My question is, why? Why do we need to pay more? Of course, this isn't the only thing that Resident Evil 4 does. The game has microtransactions, yay! For $3, you can buy exclusive upgrade tickets, as many as your heart and bank account can handle, so you can get upgrades for your weapons. Essentially, it's a pay-to-win aspect. And sure, you can argue that you're only affecting your own experience with the game with these and no one is forcing you to buy them, but that's a terrible argument because that ignores the real issues that come from microtransactions as well as the kind of DLC that I mentioned above. Microtransactions, the above-mentioned DLC, have had a significant impact on game design. Developers used to create complete games with all content available at a reasonable price. Now it seems they purposely withhold features and essential components only to charge us extra to unlock them.
Hello, I like money.
When done this way as well, developers will prioritize making the in-game purchases more appealing. Even if it's just for cosmetic or offering exclusive goodies, it creates an unfair advantage for players wanting to open their wallets. I will concede that for more single-player based games, this isn't as big of an issue. But here's the thing, games used to have options like this that would allow you to bypass skill issues. We used to call them cheat codes, where you could input stuff that would make you invincible, or in some cases just give you a big head. There are more egregious cases out there. Diablo 4 caused a bit of a stir with microtransactions at launch earlier this year. Or if you want a lot more recent, Street Fighter 6 announced that they would be getting Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle skins for the game, in coordination for the new Mutant Mayhem movie that came out. Which is nice, except for the fact that it costs $15 to get the skin for each turtle. Yep, you gotta pay $60 for these skins. The same price you could for the base game. Sad part is, you know someone out there is gonna buy these things because it's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, one of the biggest IPs in history. Of course people are gonna buy it. And that's the rut of this, really. That someone is gonna buy this stuff and continue the cycle. That's not new content, it's just something to help you get ahead in the game. I'm not opposed for DLC, or paying for it. I am when it's content that should have been in the base game. It isn't superfluous or it's just overpriced. Hell, I remember when I bought a remake for Klonoa on the Wii, it came with a coupon for a free taco at a place called At least it was something that I got for my money. If we're paying these big bucks for games, we deserve more bang for our bucks. Even more so when these games have a lot of issues and need to be fixed.
I want to apologize.
Game over is a state of failure for the game designer. Boss fights are outdated. We don't use the word fun. I'm sure you've heard these quotes or mindsets before, especially from prominent game developers over the last few years. Game developers who want to make the medium mature. To have studios that make story-based games start taking their stories more seriously. As if they weren't before. I don't even have to say the names of the people who said these quotes. They're responsible for some of the trends in gaming design that I really don't like, especially when it comes to storytelling in games. And I know there's going to be people who will disagree with what I'm saying here, and that's fine. Make your own video. But to me, there's been this small creeping trend of games that are trying too hard to be like movies, supposedly focusing more and more on the narrative than the actual game aspect, or at the very least attempt to be more like films. I want to make it clear there's nothing wrong with making a game that takes elements from films. I'm a huge fan of narrative-driven games, and as a Metal Gear Solid fan, well, we'll get back to that in a moment. But there's a clear difference between the mediums, and not just them, but between all storytelling vessels, and that's because games have the unique ability to tie their narratives to their gameplay. Some do it better than others, but games have not only the element of interactivity to work with their storytelling, but more often than not, games will have more than 2 hours of content to work with. Frequently, the content can be between 10 and 40 hours. It's because of the aforementioned interactivity that can make these long playtimes worth it. And this isn't to say you need to just have gameplay, as there are things like visual novels, point and clicks, or even just choices in the gameplay are enough to get people's attention. And it's not help that games are often seen as a tool to help push some message. I'm sure that a lot of people aren't going to agree with me on this point, and that's perfectly fine, but when I see stuff like The Last of Us 2 getting countless awards, I'm often told that it and the first game are the greatest stories in gaming. I do not agree with that at all. Then there's writing in games, something that has been a rising trend as well. Earlier this year we got Forspoken, where it had some pretty cringy dialogue that set the internet on fire. Now I've talked about my issues with the narrative in previous videos, like how Frey is so stupid that she can't grab a bag full of money that's right next to her out of a burning building before grabbing her cat. It'll only take 1 second as you're moving, but that's beside the point. Game writing is different from other forms of media writing, and that's how it has that interactivity aspect to it, and at times games don't really utilize this strength as much as we'd like to nowadays, at least from what I've seen. And stuff like Metal Gear Solid not only doesn't have filmography in its blood, but also remembers that it's a game. It includes things such as boss fights, elements of storytelling and gameplay mixed together, and being entertaining as all hell.
Aren't they the ones who accuse Yoshi P and the developers of making the game 100% white, so they're racist?
Final Fantasy XVI dev has a terrible answer for why the game is so white. Naoki Yoshida feels that racial diversity would be a violation of narrative boundaries.
Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live.
Yeah, it has come to this point again. Video game journalism. Can you even really call it journalism about gaming when a lot of it's bogged down with some of the most inane stupidity in the world? I probably don't even have to give examples because many of us could probably think of some articles or events that are just so mind-numbingly stupid. If you're an old fossil like me, some of you would probably remember the time that Jeff Keighley became the Dorito Pope to stare directly into our very souls, to sell us chips and Mountain Dew. Game journalists not knowing actually how to get past the tutorial stage in Cuphead, complaining that Chun-Li isn't the Mortal Kombat film, demanding that games need easy modes, accusing Nintendo and Persona 5 of using a slur in one of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate songs, claiming that they're being ableist, all because the writer misheard the lyrics and didn't bother to check the lyrics online, and really just makes you wonder, why is this an article?
Ladies and gentlemen, I think my brain just committed suicide.
Oh, and don't forget all the current stuff going on, like one of the latest that journalists are going nuts over the bare sex scene in Baldur's Gate 3, and then going on and on about how Baldur's Gate is setting a precedent for gaming that other developers can't handle. Or if you want to question some things, yeah, I'm not reading that title. The thing with journalists is, they're pretty much useless. I'm not the first person to say this, but if you had a YouTuber who made video reviews of games, why would you ever waste your time with game journalists? Gaming journalism is a joke at this point. Back when sites like YouTube, Twitch, and etc. weren't even around, gaming journalism was a needed job to inform readers of upcoming games, providing tips and anything that Nintendo Power could provide. Yeah, they were magazines, but they were great and sold amazingly well, since you read about games and only games from page 1 to the last one. No ideological bullshit, politics, or current year activism. Games pure and simple. 100% game-related info. Hell, some magazines came with demos and free games, but nowadays? Why do I want to read a diatribe and think piece from some no-name journalist who will take the time to virtue signal using one paragraph to actually talk about the game and then spend 100 on why the developers are the worst people in the world? Nowadays, if I want to know about a game, I trust the people who are actually playing the games on YouTube or Twitch. The YouTuber more often than not has better comedy, a better personality, and you won't have to worry about them having a mental breakdown about how awful our world is during a PS5 review. Why is this here? Who approved to put this in the article? Imagine if I started review and went, hey everybody, let's talk about Yakuza 0 today, but before we do, I just have to say that our country is the garbage fire, and because of our president, oh god. But if you had a YouTuber who made video reviews of games, why would you ever waste your time with game journalists? It's a lot more simple, and depending on the streamer or YouTuber, might get a much more honest review and some entertainment value out of it. And hey, you at least know that the people you're watching are actually playing the games they're talking about, or you can watch them play as they go. I wonder if some of these journalists have even lifted up a game controller in the past. And I wouldn't have much of an issue, except these game journalists somehow get a ton of perks. They get access to games early, support from the industry, and actually get to decide what games get what awards. They're just pointless at this point, and they're like VHS tapes. They're obsolete.
Found you. Get back inside, silly. It's cold out here. Alright, now seriously, hold still. I'm gonna get it this time, I promise.
Again, we're going a bit more subjective with this issue, but it's one that I feel needs to be brought up, and yeesh. So the other day I was looking up an older game, God Hand, a game where you can actually kick people in the balls. No. I played the game a long time ago, and I wanted to get back into some more retro gaming, and I figured, how much could this game cost? It's not that different on something like eBay, but this is one of the biggest issues with older games, and how outside of emulation, there's going to be a pretty hefty price tag to play them legally. And this just got nastier over the pandemic. This is even the worst example of this. You ever hear of Rule of Rose? This shows that there's an issue with game preservation, as there are a ton of games that are locked into systems that they were introduced on. Don't get me wrong, there have been a lot more accessibility to older games. Hell, I brought up Metal Gear Solid earlier, and we're getting the collection that is coming to a lot of platforms. But not every game has that luxury, especially a lot of older games. Not too long ago, I reviewed a game called Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelists of the Roses. It was a very commercially successful game, selling over 1 million copies, and even garnered the PlayStation 2 Greatest Hits title. And that's essentially the only way you can play the game outside of emulation. It's not the greatest game of all time, but that's my point. Games like Duelists of the Roses or God Hand are games that are almost 2 decades old, and there have been no modern attempt to bring them to newer hardware. Same thing for games like Persona 1 and 2, which at the latest you can play on the PSP. Although Persona 2 is a much more messy story since that game was split in two, and you really can't get the PSP adaptation of Part 2 due to it not being released outside of Japan. And it's a mess because you could get these games on the PS Vita storefront, but back in 2021, Sony attempted to close the storefront but backed off due to backlash. only to make it a lot harder to purchase games via those storefronts. You can no longer use a credit card or debit card or payment methods such as PayPal to buy digital content or add funds to your wallet. Can you see why this is an issue? While you have Nintendo with their classic games section, while you subscribe to their online systems, but this doesn't include the N64 or advanced titles since you have to buy them via the expansion pack. Same with the Sega Genesis collection. This is an interesting solution, but one that I have an issue with, meaning not only do you have to pay extra for the classic games for the additional consoles, but there's also another solution. Remakes! I brought up remakes already in this video, what with the Metal Gear Solid and Resident Evil 4, and hey, the fact that classic games are getting remade is good. And if you're not interested in the remakes, these ones still do have the originals that are coming out, or are out. Hell, the same thing can be said for Dead Space. Of course, not every game gets the remake re-release treatment, although more and more remakes are starting to crop up. But most of the time, the games that do get remakes or re-releases are already commercial successes, with one or two flaws here and there. Games that don't have a lot of accessibility or been released on modern platforms don't get this treatment. But hey, we just gotta have The Last of Us be on every single new generation, don't we? And sometimes remakes aren't really done that well either. Remember my section about bugs that released? Rockstar released GTA Trilogy Definitive Edition and it was riddled with bugs and glitches. Or going back to Pokemon, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. I feel like I don't need to say anything with those games. And while I'm not against remakes, I will say I would prefer there being new games being made, because if you have a remake, you don't really have to worry about making something new. You already have the base product to jump off of. And it really just needs to adjust gameplay and graphics and maybe fix a few things. A lot of games don't really need to do a lot of experimentation nowadays. There's a formula. So when I see a remake, while I'm happy to see a game from my past being brought back to the modern day, I feel sad we're not really getting a new installment. There are countless issues in the gaming world, and frankly, I just scratched the surface of these issues, but you all need to realize something. Part of the reason why these problems are problems in the first place is because we are consumers, and we allow these practices to thrive. Game companies know that gamers will buy superfluous DLC because we buy that DLC. They know we'll pay $70 for a game because we're willing to pay that much for a new game. Journalists can act like asshats because we share their dumb takes on social media, and some people will click their articles and give them exposure. It's because we as gamers allow these situations of gaming to occur. We vote with our wallets, and unfortunately, even if you're against some of the more predatory practices, there are others who are willing to shell out the money to allow companies to continue their terrible behaviors. That to me is why online services have gotten a lot more expensive and have a lot less features as of late. Luckily, there are ways out of this. And that's support the indie scene. There are plenty of unique and original titles out there that can really open up the doors to new games and ideas for the gaming industry. Support the developers that you like, don't support the bad practices, and be sure to just ignore the journalists. They don't matter in the long run, and support the creators that you do trust. I mean, that can be for me too, but hey, if you just made it to this point in the video, that's good enough for me and I appreciate it. I don't have all the answers on how to fix the gaming industry, but we can start small and have it grow. After all, we're gamers. Even if we lose a life, we always have continues. I'm MangaKamen, and thanks for watching.